Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So the first item on the agenda is to note that Mrs Seaton was nominated as the chairman of the committee at the annual meeting of the County Council on the 16th of May. Can I confirm that this is agreed and seconded?
I'll move.
Second.
So we'll now welcome Mrs Seaton to the chair.
Thank you. Thank you to the committee. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council's website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can anyone please switch off their mobile phones and when speaking, then turn on when speaking, then turn it off when finishing. And I did put mobile phones there because I'm so used to it. It's microphone. Unfortunately, we have not received any nomination for parent governors representatives for this post. This post is currently being re-advertised. I have received apologies from Mrs Maggie Wright and Mr Licorice acting as her substitute. Welcome. Election of Deputy Chair. I would ask for nominees, please, as Deputy Chair.
Yeah, I'll move Hilary Fryer as the Deputy Chair.
Seconded.
I second that, Chair.
Thank you. Minutes of meeting held on the 5th of March. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of March are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Would that be agreed? Agreed. Thank you. I have received no questions from members of the public. And I have received no questions from members either. I have not been notified of any urgent items. And can I ask do any members have any interests they wish to declare at this point? Do members have any declarations? I am not aware of any petitions. Are there any petitions to be handed in at this point? No? Thank you. We now move to the first main item on the agenda, Draft Children and Families Partnership Plan 2018-21.
Good morning, everybody. This, I think, is a really good news story for us. We haven't had a children's partnership in Leicestershire for a number of years now. Members may remember it used to be called a trust some years ago, and that operated and then that stopped. So this is the first time we've had a partnership plan for a number of years. It was drawn up by the Children's Partnership, which is made up of members from all the key agencies that work in children and family services in Leicestershire, and it's chaired by our esteemed colleague Councillor Old, and the partnership has been working extremely hard over the last year or so to produce the plan, which again is the first time we've had a plan for a number of years. This is important for us because we know that a lot of the work that we do in the council, we cannot do it independently. We have to do it with partner agencies, and this plan allows us to plan with partner agencies the key priorities that we want to achieve over the next few years. It is not completely exhaustive of all the work that we do, but what it does is picked out a number of key priorities not only us in the council, but partners have identified as important for our work over the next 3 years. What it sets out in the plan are these priorities, and the fact that these will be the basis on which we will be judged on our performance in 3 years' time. So if we come back in 3 years' time, all of the elements in this hopefully will be put into place and fully operational, and that will be making a real difference to children and young people in Leicestershire. I don't intend this morning to go through all of the key priority areas in the document, but other than to reinforce that these priorities have been drawn out, an exhaustive process that's gone over 12 months with key partners, young people, to identify the most important elements for us. There'll be a lot of detailed work that will go on behind this to deliver these priorities, and there will be working groups that will be set up to actually deliver those. That will be supported by our partnership team, which is now based in our commissioning setup in the Children and Family Services, and they will monitor progress. They won't necessarily do all the operational elements of it, but they will monitor progress. And over the period we can report back to this committee progress that we made on the key priorities. So perhaps I'll stop at that point and take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Meredith.
Thank you very much. I think that is a really great way forward. But I wonder if you could explain to me that the priorities are very much overarching from 0 to 19. And in my little mind, I see there is a difference between young children and maybe young people of 17, 18 or whatever. So whilst the priorities are fairly or very generic, I was wondering, how do you separate the needs of the lower age groups, or just talk me through that? Yes, thank you.
I think in certain aspects they will be not necessarily age specific. So for instance, things about sexual exploitation and things like that could be from very young children up to adolescents. But there could be other elements of the plan which relate more specifically to adolescents, and you'll see in the plan we talk about our aspiration is to move towards setting up a multi-agency team to deal with vulnerable young people in the older age range. So that's where that would be picked up in that element. You will see that there are certain sections that relate to the first very important days of young children's lives, so that's very much focused on young children, obviously, and not older children. So I think there's various elements in the plan, without going through each specific one, that could either be generic across the whole piece or specifically relate to certain areas. But I think just to reinforce the point, in no way is the partners saying this is completely exhaustive of everything we do. For us to work together in this way, it's important that we identify the absolute top priorities, and that will give us more chance of being successful in then saying that we're going to change the whole world, because I think that's going to be more difficult for us over the period. So it's the top priority areas, either age specific or subject specific. So.
Yes, thank you. In terms of scrutinising a plan like this, I think it's important to have context and a sense of narrative, where the plan starts, where the plan ends, and what the journey looks like in between. So could Mr. Meredith explain what the current issues are that the plan is trying to address? What will the service look like at the end of the plan period, i.e. 2021? And how will we ensure full participation from partners?
Okay, well, I mean, you don't really want me to go through all each single priority in the plan. We could be here for some time if we do, but I'm happy to do that if you want me to. but it's just to reiterate the points. So, for instance, if we looked at one of the priorities, perhaps that may be a good way of picking up the point that we've identified. If we took priority 2, which is safe and free from harm, how would we judge that we had been successful in this? That we would say that at the end of the period, or in the period, because although this is for a 3-year period, we will be reviewing the plan on an annual basis and maybe adding things in or taking things out as we go along, so it's very dynamic. but we would say that we would have established a multi-agency safeguarding hub, and that's how we would be judged that we have been successful in that particular area. If we, for instance, looked at the area relating to ensure vulnerable families receive personalised integrated care and support, so a lot of that relates to children with disabilities. So we would look at that. We've got a much more extensive offer that we're providing to families for short breaks, respite provision, play and leisure facilities than we have at present. So the judgment would be in 2018 that was the suite of services we had. At this point in time, we've now developed a whole range of new services or added more to it or refocused services in different way. So we think that's an improved model. And as I explained, below each of these priorities there will be working groups, and there are detailed work programs that specify time limits and achievements to achieve these. And we can report that back to this committee to actually show progress. So can you remind me, because there was a number of aspects to your question, Sean, wasn't there?
Yes, if that's okay, Chair. It was about where we're starting from in terms of the issues that we're trying to address, what's happening now that we wish to see changed, what will the service look like as a result of the plan having been implemented, in terms of what impact will it have for the service users out there, as it were, and quite importantly, how you ensure full participation from your suite of partners that are so important in delivering this.
Okay, well, hello? It's on, is it? All right. Yeah. Okay, so, I mean, where we're starting from is what's outlined in the plan, and as I explained earlier, these are priorities. It's not just the council, it's what all our partners have got together to identify as the top priorities that we actually want to work on. That's where we are at this time. What we want to achieve is identified there. That's how we will judge whether we've been successful. The partnership continues to operate under Council Roll's chairmanship, and the partners are all party to these arrangements. Each of these priorities has a separate lead, and some of them are from different partners. So, for instance, priority 2, that is led actually by the police. So the lead for that section is the police officer that is responsible for child protection in that area. So he will report back to the partnership board about progress that they're actually making, and I can't see any reason why in due course that we couldn't extend that out to this committee to say that we would want some reporting back from those particular areas. The area that I've taken particular responsibility in is priority 4. The best start in life is Jane Moore, Assistant Director. We have a Chief Exec from one of the districts that's chairing, I think it's priority 3. Is that right? I think it's priority 3. And we have a health colleague, a Commissioner for Health, with one of our public health officers that's chairing priority 5. So I think you can see from that it is very much an engagement of all the key partners, and with those detailed business plans behind them about what we're going to achieve when, and those groups reporting back to the partnership, and as I say, back to this committee if that was felt to be appropriate. I think it probably would be. Then hopefully we can achieve the change that we want to achieve.
Yeah, I take the point about distributing the leadership roles within the partnership group, which is obviously very appropriate given the nature of this. But I think with Ivan listening to the general drift of where I'm getting at, I should expect to understand a little bit more about that journey come the next year when we review this. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, by all means. I mean, as I say, we can report in more detail in terms of what we've actually achieving over that period.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions, both quite short, I think. Just pick up what Mr. Sheehan said about partners attending. We know in a number of other areas of partnership working, we struggle to get all the partners to actively engage. Are you saying that at the moment you think that this is of sufficient gravity that they will take part? And I'll give you my second question now. The MASH, is this really a growth and consolidation of what's happening at Wigston at the moment? Are we looking at something that formalises that and draws some slightly wider boundaries around the great work that Donna and the police team are doing at Wigston?
The second point first. The plan, lots of areas of the plan is actually consolidating and building on activities that we were undertaking. So it's not as if we've gone and created a completely new agenda. It's just taking some of those agendas further. So as you're saying, we know we've done some good work about CSE and that hub. We know we do some very good joint work with the police around general safeguarding investigations, and that was evidenced in the Ofsted report. We work with the police in Wigston Police Station, where the CSE hub is as well on that. So this is building on that work and taking that to a higher level to say, in the success we've had in those areas, which are based on that we get all the key partners together, we share information as appropriate, and then we're more effective. Why don't we take that to a higher level in covering all aspects of our work at that level? So in essence, that's what that's about. There isn't necessarily a massive revenue demand on the development of that service, because a lot of those things are there. It's just citing them and getting people working in a different way, maybe sharing information in a slightly different way. So that's a good example. In terms of engagement of the partners, all you will see in the plan, all the partners have put their logos on there. It's our intention to have a launch in the early autumn. We hope that we can get all the key movers and shakers in all the main organisations, senior managers from those organisations to come and endorse the plan and say that they're signing up to that thing. And I think having a document which says all of these agencies, this is what we want to achieve, and you've got senior officers who are signing up to that, the chances of us delivering that in that way are much greater. Of course, we have the esteemed chairmanship of Councillor Old as well to take into account, who holds all the key partners to task in the meetings as well, and attendance and commitment, given that partners are dealing with all these individual work streams, has been good to date. But, the proof of the pudding's in the eating. It's a good start, but we've got to make some ongoing progress over the next year or so to get some real change.
Thank you. Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you very much. My question is really to do with the resource implications. I noticed in your very good report that resources are in place until October next year, but in the way that councils work, budgets start being set this September, October for 2019-20, and I would just like to know a little bit more of what you plan to ensure that this continues.
Well, when we, because as I explained earlier, there hasn't been a partnership before, and we were starting off from new, we weren't quite sure where this was going to go. So when we established a resource to support it, we did put a time limit on it just to make sure that it was going somewhere. The fact that I think we're building up some momentum now on this in some way would mean that we would positively want to look at continuing that resource into the future. We will start planning our budget in the autumn time, in September time, and I can't definitively say now, obviously, because there's a whole lot of other priorities and governance arrangements that operate, but we will be looking to see if we can continue that post into the future. The other key element here is that we have now established that post within our commissioning team, within the department, under the leadership of a head of service, so that has also given an extra status to it that will hopefully see it continue into the future.
Thank you. Mr Pendleton.
Thank you, Chairman. Moving to Appendix B, page 35, I applaud the amount of work that's gone into looking and finding the youth voice and making sure that it is represented and represented well. I'm absolutely staggered by the amount of resource time taken to actually get that and capture the message from that voice. Moving forward, I'm wondering, it would be easy to tick that box and move away and say we've done it, that's it, those priorities will never change. Can you give me some reassurance that that voice will be sampled again, because priorities do change, despite the large input in terms of resource to get it?
I mean, this is about changing the lives of children and young people, and one of the most important aspects of doing that is actually listening to children and young people and engaging them in whether we've been successful in saying what some of the things that they told us that we wanted to achieve. So I think this is an absolutely key element, something that we need to continue to work on, not do it just now and again, but have it actually built into the whole plan as we go along. And I know Marla, who's been doing the work on this, has spent a lot of time in that, is very committed to it, and we will continue to do that and work with our other advocacy partnership services that operate in the department to make sure we're engaging young people in this process. It's absolutely essential.
Thank you. Mrs Wright.
Thank you. Just in terms of the document, and I'm focusing primarily on priority 5, on the face of it, I recognise what this document is, and it's generalistic in terms of achievements and what we intend to do. I'm interested to know who the lead is going to be on priority 5, and indeed, I don't know whether you'd be willing to share with us the leads that are going to be on all of the priorities, simply because that person who takes the lead is going to be accountable in terms of making sure that there is effective communication between all the partnerships. And it goes back, I think, to the point about ensuring that there is going to be decent communication, because that's the whole key to this, isn't it? Communication at the end of the day, and making sure that the partnership works well together. So that was my first question. And actually, I think my second one was in relation to borough councils and the role that borough councils will have. A lot of borough councils have very active health and well-being areas. They have a lot of involvement, for instance, in Hinckley and Bosworth. We have meetings with our MP, David Tredinnick, on a regular basis, and there's a lot of work on prevention and health and well-being. And I just want to get some reassurance from you on that front, that there is going to be feed-in from boroughs into this whole programme, and that it's all part of the dissemination process. Because again, I just get back to the point, it's dissemination and communication that is going to mean whether this works or whether it falls flat on its face, in my view.
Borough councils, Jane Toman, who's the chief exec of Blaby Council, is the representative on there. Clearly we can't have all of the councils represented on there, so she is our rep, and she feeds back via the various processes that operate with the district chief execs getting together. And in fact, we've already had some successes on that. We've had some. Jane has managed to negotiate with all the councils some reduction of council tax for young people who are being looked after. So that was a significant achievement across the whole piece. So she will continue to be involved and lead that one section and feed back in that way. We can by all means send round a note about who's operating in which section here. Section 5 is led by our health commissioners plus our public health colleagues in the council, and that's a joint leadership on that particular issue. But I take the point, and you know, the making sure all the partners take a lead in this is absolutely key. That it doesn't fall back on the council, that they're all engaged with it, and to be fair, all the partners have actively engaged in this process. So I am encouraged by that, and you're absolutely right. And then that's a way then of actually ensuring that this becomes an effective document and not just another piece of paper sitting on the shelf.
Thank you. So can I be assured then that we will get to know the names of the leads? So you're saying now that Priority 5 is a joint lead. I mean, what I would like are actual names of the people who are going to be responsible. So therefore, we have direct accountability in terms of who is responsible for each priority area.
Yes, well, and we can circulate those. The reason I'm just being a little hesitant is that there will be some changes. For instance, I'm leading on one of the sections, and members will probably know that I'm probably going to be leaving the authority shortly, so we'll have to nominate someone else to pick up where we are with that position. But yeah, we can put it on the record who's leading each of the particular sections. The police officer that was leading one section, Simon Cure, I know is leaving, so they've got to nominate a new officer to cover that section.
Thank you. Any further questions on this? No, I'd just like to make a comment that I think the committee acknowledges to actually have a plan in place for the Leicester Children and Families Partnership that we haven't had before is very welcomed and a positive move. The details within the plan are going to be ongoing, and hopefully the different scrutinies over the year until it started will help to develop that. It's also noted that for this to be successful, full partnership is key with all of our partners and that have been identified. And I welcome this plan. Thank you. We move forward now to Agenda 11 on page 41, which gives us the progress report for the Ofsted recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members. Before you is the up-to-date report on the progress made against our continuous improvement action plan that members will be aware was put into place following our Ofsted inspection late in 2016. So the plan runs from beginning January 2017 for a 3-year period. The details of the progress made to date is attached in Appendix A, and when I previously came to scrutiny, members gave feedback that was a useful way for members to receive the feedback, so that's the format that this report has taken again. The details of the our Road to Excellent plan are at the beginning of the report and are clear around the key ethos and challenges for us about our strategic vision for being a learning organisation, ensuring that we embed excellent practice across the service, ensure importantly that we are taking the right action at the right time at the right level for children and families who require services from us, and that we develop and review to keep our policies and performance up to date to underpin the work that we're doing. So the key highlights for this time are that a review of first response led by myself and involving heads of service took place in December of last year. That showed evidence of significant improvement around the processes and reporting and actions that are taken at our front door. What I can report at the time of writing this report, I highlighted for members that we had commissioned an independent consultant to do a mock inspection of the front door for us in May. That has been successfully completed and encouragingly reports on a lot of progress made at the front door, reporting back on the timeliness of decisions, management oversight, processes being very firmly embedded, and building on the key issues around the Ofsted improvement, where we had really strong processes around children deemed to be at risk, but there was question marks over how timely our responses were around children in need. So what she reports really pleasingly is that there is progress in all those areas, and where we have deemed ourselves to be on this journey has been supported by that report. And really importantly, for the service and the managers and staff within the service who've worked hard, reports very positively on morale in that part of the service, manageable caseloads, and that staff see that the investment that the local authority have put in the front door is helping them to perform the jobs that we need them to do. The areas identified for further development are those that we'd identified. So we are far better on the timeliness of assessments. We do far more assessments, possibly 4 times more assessments than we were doing at the time of the inspection. Good at relationship building and gaining the voice of the child and family. What we'd identified for this next period was real work around embedding professional curiosity and making sure that we were really triangulating the information that were given by families to make sure that we weren't taking things at face value. And what she's identified is that she can see the progress being made there, and that's the right and the key area that we now need to be focusing on. Information around single assessment timeliness, that's improving month by month. In March we were reporting 85%. Last month we were in the early 90s in relation to those assessments in timeliness. It is a year to end data, performance data that we report on, because we obviously started from a lower base of the numbers because of the numbers we needed to complete that were in a backlog. That year to date figure is affected by where we were at the start of this process, but making a lot of positive improvement there. Rates of re-referrals continue to be an area that we're focusing on. We are not out of kilter with our regional colleagues. This is data that I share with assistant directors across the region to look at what some of the key areas are for all of us. And we do now, for the last 4 or 5 months, every month an independent audit is completed of any cases where there's been a re-referral or the referral has resulted in no further action. So we do a sample of those. We do all the re-referrals and a sample of the no further action so that we can report on consistency of decision making, and that's showing a real improvement over decision making and management oversight. The number of children who become subject of a child protection plan for a second or subsequent time, as members are aware, is an area that's been a focus for us for some time and continues to be. We do have months where that figure is low. It's been down as low as 0% on some months, but our year-to-end data is showing us at about 24%. I have reported into committee previously that regionally counties are reporting a higher number around that area than cities, and we believe that's to do with that there's far more movement of families in city areas out. Usually geographically they cover a much smaller area, so when our families move they tend to stay within our counties. So that again is a key area of work. We perform really well on child protection cases being reviewed within timescale. We've done significant work and continue to perform well against children in care not having more than 3 moves. Obviously we don't aspire to 3 moves. We're measured on a target of if children have more than 3 moves, that is seen understandably as a very negative area, and the local authority has done a lot of work on that area over the last few years. Key areas around the health of children looked after is a gradual improving picture, and importantly for our older youngsters in care, we've seen a significant improvement in the completion of pathway plans for this group of youngsters. I have noted in there that one of the challenges for us is that our new responsibilities to care leavers has increased. Yeah, shall I keep? Yeah, sorry. Do you want me to keep going? Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, sorry. So a number of data that's included around our care leavers and support to care leavers that takes members through the progress that's being made. One of the key challenges for us, an area that will be the key determinant of our continued success rather, is around the recruitment and retention of sufficiently and appropriately experienced staff. We, as part of the growth money from the local authority, have been able to increase the number of staff in the service. Where that has happened in a timely way, and the front door first response is one such area, we've seen the embedding of the work that needs to be undertaken and some significant progress made. Our recruitment and retention and work around that strategy is ongoing, and we have over the last few months seen the recruitment to a number of key posts. So in our looked after children's services, our recruitment there when posts do become vacant is very successful, as is the recruitment to our practice excellence posts, which are the part of the service that we established to help us drive forward the improvements that we want to make. We have recruited when needed to team managers, which is positive, but we have seen some significant challenges around the recruitment of experienced social workers. We have recruited a number of newly qualified staff who will join us over the summer, and we do know that we have some real successes with that group of staff, and the staff that have completed their year in assessment with us this year are showing to be some really promising social workers and workers, but to give them the best start in their career and to reassure us of their capabilities and ability to take on some of this work, they have a very reduced caseload during the first year and some intensive and detailed continued training. So we're seeing successes of that, and we have recruited a number of people to join us this coming summer, but one of the key challenges for us is that we are not attracting into the authority when we have vacancies experienced social workers from other authorities to any level that will help us. It is a challenge for us. I think that covers the overview of the progress made to date, and obviously if there are questions.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to ask one question. Is that challenge of recruitment from other authorities reflected in other authorities as well? Or are we losing our newly qualified professionals to other authorities?
Twofold. It's a national issue, and nationally the social work profession is struggling to recruit and retain experienced workers in frontline practice. So that we're not dissimilar to other authorities on that front. The added challenge to us is that the recruitment and retention strategy that we are and have been developing over the last 18 months, other authorities are further forward with some of that work than we've been in Leicestershire. And some of the financial incentives that they offer has been quite a challenge for us.
Mr. Sheehan.
Yes, thank you. Same topic, which I think is quite an important one. You say we have increased staff, but by how much against target? In other words, are we 50% of the way there, 60% of the way there? What is that figure? Are the new staff we're getting in permanent or agency? How will your recruitment and retention strategy make a difference? And when do you now expect to hit target?
In relation to, we're not carrying vacancies, so we made a commitment supported by the local authority that we would bring agency staff into post so that we weren't carrying vacancies across the service. That has been positive in that we've been able to address pressures immediately. The downside of that is twofold. One is that agency staff, by the very nature of their employment, tend to move around and don't ordinarily. We've had some that have stayed, but don't ordinarily stay with authorities long term. So it's good that we don't hold vacancies, but a difficulty with agency staff is that you can have a large turnover of staff, and we've seen that in some of our most challenging teams, and that's not good for anybody, but particularly is not good for families who then need to get used to a new worker. So that's not positive. In relation to our recruitment, we have recruited to all our managerial posts and our new posts within practice excellence. We are currently recruiting to additional posts within our IRO, Independent Reviewing Officers Service. So those posts are posts that we've covered with agency, and we have recruited and secured and have had people moving into permanent posts. So that is positive. Where we are struggling, but we've not got vacancies, but we are struggling to recruit to permanent posts, are our child protection and strengthening families teams out in the localities. We're addressing that in two ways. One is we're looking at the structure of those teams to see whether that workload and balance between the child protection court work and child in need work is right, and whether we can do work that would make those teams not only better and more responsive to the children's needs, but actually we would reduce some of the pressure that are on certain teams around the child protection work and work with children who are in proceedings. We have recruited about 20 new social workers who will be starting with us from now up to the end of the summer, but they are newly qualified social workers. So when they start with us, they will need, for that first year in practice, reduced caseloads and work and support around their development. To do that and to support that, we've got two things. One is we are working with Frontline, which is an organisation who are going to work with us and support a unit of 4 newly qualified social workers, and they start with us in September. And we've revised our offer and programme for newly qualified social workers, and we've done that based very much on feedback from staff that have gone through that, so staff have been actively involved in it. We are continually meeting and reviewing our recruitment and retention strategy. So we're making positive inroads, but it would be wrong for me not to identify for committee that this is a key challenge for us.
I'm not sure you answered all my questions. You said you've recruited 20 newly qualified staff, but what's that like against target? How far short are you in terms of achieving your recruitment goals? Following on from that, when do you expect to get to where you need to be?
Our recruitment to the 20 new staff are the vacant social work posts that we have. The challenge for us is that some of those newly qualified social workers will be replacing experienced social workers. So we've recruited to the vacancy, we've recruited to the post, but the experience of the worker that's coming to us is not the same as the experience of the worker that's leaving that vacancy. So it's more complex than to say you've got 10 vacancies as an example, and have you recruited to those 10 vacancies? We are recruiting actively and are seeing more success in the recruitment to those vacancies, but the experience of the workers that are coming in to replace our social workers, in the main it's not that our own social workers are all going out of the authority. Those social workers may be moving to posts that we've established in other parts of the service. So for instance, the post that we've established in our practice excellence team, the post that we've established in our independent reviewing officers teams, and the additional posts that we've put within our fostering, adoption and children in care teams are teams that have recruited and attracted sufficiently experienced workers, and it's positive because that's part of our retention to our own workers. But what it does is it's taken staff out of our child protection teams.
Okay, I'm still not getting the answer I'm looking for. I mean, can I put it slightly differently? How much further are you expecting to have to go with your recruitment? And when are you going to get there? That's important.
Mr. Meredith.
I think what Sharon's saying is it's a very dynamic picture. I think if we go back to the Cabinet report that went about the investment in the department, we talked about caseloads and we set target caseloads for us to work to. Because pressures on our service go up and down, mainly up, very rarely down, for instance, the number of looked after children continues to grow. So as it grows, because one of our priorities is to keep caseloads at manageable levels, that's the way you retain staff and recruit staff, the biggest factor, you have to change the situation. And in that paper, it also identified, as Sharon has explained, that when we take on newly qualified workers, they have a reduced caseload. That means if we want to keep the caseloads overall low, we might have to take some additional agency people on to keep the caseloads at manageable levels. So what we've got is our standards are clearly based on caseloads, what are reasonable caseloads for us to operate across the piece. And as the situation develops, we review those and we change what we actually require at any point in time to deliver that. So we haven't got, we need 100 social workers at this point in time to deliver. We've got some, as Sharon's explained, most of the posts that we've got here are actually full. We haven't got lots of vacancies all over the place, but we're still working to make sure. I mean, ideally, what we would like is all of our workers to be permanent, experienced, long-term workers. I think the chances of us getting that are pretty slim. So I don't think we're trying to avoid the question. It's just it's not as simple as saying we need 20 workers and everything's going to be okay, because it is a very dynamic and changing picture in terms of where we are. But I think what we feel it is an improving situation compared to what it was 18 months ago. It's significantly improved. There's no question about that, and caseloads are significantly lower than they were then. There are still some pressure areas for us that we have to go back and maybe look at, and maybe say we need to put some extra resource into those areas as well to keep the caseloads low. But overall, it's a much healthier position, and we'll continue to review it and adjust what our target is. So there isn't just some completely set target, we need 100 and everything's fine. It's just a bit more complicated than that.
With respect, there is a target there. There's two targets. One's for March 18, which we've missed, and then there's another one for 2020. Is that target going to be hit, or do we take no notice of that?
Mr. Meredith.
Well, it's on page 48, if that's any help, under...
Is it on the RAG rating?
It's on the
Yeah.
Appendix A, yeah, page 48.
I think we've already had it explained to us that it's a dynamic situation, it's a moving situation, and the same as the targets would have to be moving to reflect that. And I would not think that any company at any point could, or authority, say that we are on target for recruitment and retention, because it is a dynamic thing. And I think your question has been answered most fully, and I find it hard to understand which part of your question hasn't been answered.
Okay, if I can try and explain that then. Yeah. We have a target for for March this year, which has been missed because we're above that. Yeah. There's a further target for 2020, which is even lower. Yeah. Is that target something we can trust will be achieved or not? That's the simple question.
Shall I answer some of that? I think the targets that you're referring to on page 48 are our targets for average caseloads. Apologies, I thought you were asking for targets around the recruitment of staff.
I was, but this is a concrete measure, and I've given you a number of possible ways of answering the question. That's another one.
Okay. The targets have been met in parts of the service. So in parts of the service around our CSC teams, around our children in care teams, around fostering adoption, our targets around caseloads have been met. And as I hoped I'd pointed out, they are the areas where we have seen and do see that we can recruit staff and experienced staff too. Where we have some outliers to that are around individual workers in particular, but in some of our child protection and strengthening families teams. They are the teams that we have been doing two things. One is we're looking at the structure of those teams and the work that they cover, and secondly, we have been recruiting actively to those posts. We have recruited, but a number of the recruits are newly qualified staff who will start with us in the summer. So we need to be mindful that they can't take the numbers of cases that an experienced social worker can take, and that's a particular challenge to us. As Paul, as I highlighted already, we have kept some agency social workers in to work alongside those workers, but this is an ongoing work that we're needing to complete. And I think we would see our main success in that area when we can report that we've got all those permanent members of staff in post.
I think the answer I'm guessing is we're doing our best. That seems to be what I'm hearing. I only hope that's correct, and I think in time we'll see. But I do think those targets ought to hold some weight in terms of the accountability that we expect of scrutiny on the administration. So I think, you know, in future when we get a report, I think we need to see a measure of progress, not just a whole raft of reasons why we're missing the target.
Mr. Meredith.
I think it's unfair to say that we're doing our best. We have achieved the target in certain areas, as Sharon has outlined, and I think it's very important that we recognise that that's been achieved. We've identified there are certain areas where we still need to improve to hit our targets in some way or another. But just to say we haven't hit our targets would be very unfair, I would have to say. Because it is a mixed picture, and generally across the department, apart from some, I accept very high risk areas, we have achieved our targets. And the other very important point, I think, if you'd have looked at this situation 18 months, 2 years ago, you'd have seen a very, very different picture in terms of where we are. So I think it'd be very unfair to badge it in that sense. I think there's been significant achievement over the period in what I know when I came, what I inherited was an incredibly difficult situation with massive caseloads. Some people with caseloads up to approaching 40. So I think to cast it in those terms would be very unfair, because I think there's been actually significant progress. Yes, there are tension areas and we're working hard on that, but there's been significant progress, and I think that's been recognised by Ofsted and various other people as well.
Right, thank you. Mr. Welsh.
Thank you, Chair. It's a comment, really, about the report. There are nearly 2.5 pages of great news. If you actually read it, there's 2.5 pages explaining how well we're doing, and I think that's fantastic. However, and I don't mean this to sound churlish, Sharon mentioned one of the areas we've got a problem with, which is getting staff in. And then Sharon presented the most incredibly off-the-cuff verbal report with great detail, but I've not got any of that. And now I can't read through it. So I just wonder whether we've reached a point of progress to make perhaps a change, Chair, that instead of giving us the 2.5 pages of the good news, which I really, really do think is great, and need to support what Paul said, would it be more helpful from now if Sharon picks out, I know it will not make such a great read, but if Sharon would have put all going well, as you can see from the RAG report, but this is our big challenge, Sharon could have given us a written report about recruitment that would have allowed us to go away and ponder some of the issues. Because I'm left with my head buzzing. Are we not So, I mean, it's not the place here now to ask the questions, but are we paying enough? Are we paying what other counties pay? What are we not giving increments right to do with grading? There's just endless questions, but it's not for now, but that means we can't do good scrutiny. So my suggestion, Chair, is perhaps we look at how we present this report next time so that it makes a basis for more intelligent scrutiny. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr.
No, that's I can do that. Obviously, I did it in the way that Scrutiny found useful last time, but I appreciate that can come back in that way. As we can, if required, bring the work that we've been doing around the recruitment and retention strategy.
I do think that would be helpful. It does seem to be obviously an item that we continuously discuss to the nth degree, and probably chasing our tails a little bit because it is a moving beast. So, right, Mr. Kaufman, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I agree with Jeff. Something entirely different, and I'd like some help and information on page 43. At the bottom, we're talking about the number of days entering adoption to from entering the service into adoption, and on the other page, and I know we're doing better than our the counties that we measure against, but it does say a lower figure is possible in both these, and I wondered if you could sort of give me a picture of what needs to be done in order to get the figure lower, because when you're a kid, 517 days seems an awful long time, and so does 195. So it's not a criticism. I'll just, if you could give us an idea what we can do to help to get it down lower.
No, I appreciate that. What it says is the lower figure is positive, not about that we should be. I mean, obviously we would want to reduce that figure, but what I've tried to show there is that our lower figure is a positive because we nationally are performing relatively well against the number of days that it takes, and as I know members are aware, this is a very when a decision's being made for a child to go for adoption, quite rightly, two things. One, it needs to be the right decision for that child, and it needs to be done in as timely a way as possible for that child. But there are quite rightly processes that need to be gone through in relation to court to confirm that that's the right decision and plan for that child, and then to find a good match of carers and prospective parents that can look after the child. So we will struggle to reduce any significantly more those days because of that piece of work that needs to be done. The challenge for us, and we are performing well against it, is that we keep our figures around those dates, those figures that are provided for you. And it was to try and show, when I was saying the lower figure is positive, that we, by having a lower figure than other authorities and statistical neighbours, that's a positive for our children.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there can be nothing worse than have adoptions that break down. That is a disaster. But, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you. Taking up on from Mr. Kaufman, I understand the procedures that have to go through, and obviously adoption is a very important thing for the child and for the adoptive parents. However, I still think 517 days, which is 1 3/4 years in a child's life, is a long time. I'm just wondering, are our procedures being held up by other partners who are involved in this? I mean, what I'm trying to say is, if you've got the adopted parents, if you've got the adoptive child, and that far it seems to go well, is it the legalities that are holding back things, or is it just the norm that this is what it takes? I just think that 1.5 years or 1 3/4 years in a child's short life is an awful long time, whether it's national or anything. I just wonder whether all the authorities are working to the correct and, well, the safest but the most speedy outcomes.
yes, that there are challenges to us around good practice that we would want and should be expected to make that decision around permanence for a child as soon as is reasonably possible for that child. There are circumstances when those dates would be lower than that. If we had a relinquished baby, a family voluntarily made the decision that their child should be placed for adoption, those children are able to be placed at a much quicker, this is the average time that it takes. But these are from children entering care, and quite often when a situation arises that means that a child needs to come into care and a local authority needs to intervene, there are a number of assessments, quite rightly, both of the parents but also of other family members, that have to be taken place if we are saying adoption's right for a child and a court's making that decision and a family are opposed to that decision. So this is from a child coming into care and being placed with adoptive carers. So I agree, we do everything we possibly can, and we will continue to work and make sure that we can be as timely and we make those right decisions for children, but we have to do that in a context of a legal context.
Thank you. Thank you. Last week I attended a foster recruitment evening, and it was an excellent evening. It was well attended. I think there was about 8 families, prospective families there, and there was 3 foster couples that are experienced fosterers as well, and they were excellent, and the way they presented their experiences were very, very positive, and I think it was a very good thing to have them there, because the families that did leave, the prospective foster families, were more positive about doing that. But of course she did speak about how long the process is from a child entering the process to which actually being concluded as well, which remains an issue and a problem. Are there any other speakers? Oh, sorry, Mrs. Wright.
I just have one hopefully quick question. On page 43 we talk about the dental checks and health checks for children in care. And obviously there's presented there an improvement and progress in terms of those percentages. I'm still somewhat befuddled as to why those percentages are at 100%. I mean, a lot of these other areas are not so binary, and there are more nuances involved. But to me, those two things are, in fact, binary, and we should be at 100% on those. And I want to make sure that while we're looking through all of the social aspects of this, we're not missing out on the simple health related matters that we should have pinned down.
Yeah, agreed. They are key and important areas, and as Mr. Old, I'm sure will tell you, as the joint chair, co-chair of Corporate Parenting Board, he holds the service and colleagues in health to account for that figure, to make sure that we're driving the health needs of our young people forward. We will struggle to get to 100%, because we do, for some older young people, they may decide that, although we're working hard with them, that they are making choices about health checks. That doesn't mean that we say, fine, we do continue and we do look at ways, and we are working with the looked after nurses to find other ways that older young people that don't want to go for health checks will engage in work around their health. But they are both areas that are seeing some improvement, but we aren't where we want to be with that. Yeah, the targets remain, that we would work towards that high completion rate. Part of the work we're doing is that some of this data we're still collating manually, and the system generated is that as our Tableau reports and other reports become more sophisticated, that we can generate that data via the electronic system.
And just one more follow-up, Chair. In terms of benchmarking across other counties, where do we stand on those two items particularly?
We're average around those two items. Other authorities do struggle with those. We're not within the high performing authorities. We come average in those that performance.
Thank you. As to the health checks and the dental checks, now that they've been separated out, because it did look as though the dental checks weren't being completed, but it was identified that they were both collected together, weren't they, on there? So are there any other comments that would like to be made by the committee? No? I'd like it mention that the suggestion has been made on the recruitment and retention, a more detailed response to that, and probably something that we're not performing so well on, a more detailed presentation be given as to a written presentation, so that then we could be armed with the questions when we come here. And we do recognise that recruitment and retention is improving, but it still remains a challenge. So thank you very much. Thank you. Right, if we move on to item 12, somewhere or other. 63. Thank you very much. To item 12, overview of youth offending services. I did comment earlier that this only seemed yesterday to me. It's a sign of getting older, isn't it, that it was last presented. So I welcome, so if you will, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm joined by Chris Bolas, who's the Service Manager for Youth Offending Service and Community Safety. So the purpose of this report is to provide you with an overview of the performance of the Youth Offending Service, and as the Chair pointed out, we did bring the Youth Justice Plan to you recently, which contained the performance information. This provides a refresh of that performance information, as well as an overview of a number of areas of work and developments within the service. So just very broadly, in terms of an overview of performance, you'll see that the number of first-time entrants continue to remain low. Our reoffending is ahead of national and regional performance, and our use of custody and remand remains low. And all of those achievements demonstrate high performance of the Youth Offending Service. If I can take you to page 64, the section titled The Lamy Report. In 2017, the Lamy Report was published by the government, and it was very critical of the youth justice system, particularly in relation to the experiences of Black, Asian and minority ethnic young people, that highlighted that they were significantly overrepresented within first-time entrants, reoffending and within custody as well. The Youth Offending Service in Leicestershire have had a look at that report and done an analysis of young people within Leicestershire to look at whether those trends were mirrored. The outcome of that analysis was that we don't see a disproportionate number of Black and minority ethnic young people who are first-time entrants or in custody. However, we were concerned by some of the reoffending rates of young people, and as a result of that have had a look further into those reoffending rates just to understand whether there are any trends that we need to look at. some time ago, the Youth Offending Service set up a project called Kickstart Your Life, which was an innovative programme looking at the use of sport to work with those young people who pose the greatest risk of reoffending or causing harm to other young people or others. And this is a group of young people that we would call prolific offenders or high risk of harm offenders. And the Youth Offending Service looked at using sport as a mechanism to engage young people in activities, not only as an alternative to those negative activities they're involved in, but actually to increase or improve some of those pro-social influences in their lives. The Kickstart Your Life project enables young people to have a bespoke programme for young people, and it's has around about 18 young people engaged in the programme in the first year it ran, and went up to 36 young people in the last financial year. The Yacht has agreed with the management board of the Youth Offending Service to expand the project somewhat so that we can introduce art opportunities alongside sports, with a hope to encourage other young people to become involved in the activities. You'll note that we did primarily have some funding through the Leicestershire and Rutland Sport, who provided £10,000 for this project, and we continue to use that money to fund the project. Members will be familiar with the Impact Project, which has now been in existence for a number of years now, working with young people on the streets in areas that are identified as antisocial behaviour hotspots. The team goes out and works directly with those young people in areas that are referred by boroughs, districts, police and other local community safety teams. The Impact team use sport quite a lot to engage young people, but also now deliver a series of group work programmes in schools designed to divert young people away from antisocial behaviour. You'll note from the report the most recent annual information that we've got is for the 16-17. We're in the process of writing our 17-18 report at the moment, but you'll note that we work with 734 young people over that year, and at the moment we are working in Loughborough, Hinckley and Bosworth, Melton, Blaby, and we're planning to work in Ullersthorpe. The Impact Project is and continues to be of significant importance to the Youth Offending Service, and we know that it has an impact on reducing the number of young people entering the criminal justice system, and that team works very closely with young people who are of greatest concern, and also identify young people to the Youth Offending Service to enable us to do further work with them. And finally, the bit of work that we've highlighted for you is around knife-related crime. Again, members will be aware that nationally there's been increasing concern about the use of knives amongst young people and the association of that with gangs, and also the dealing and use of drugs. Over the last 12 months, the Youth Offending Service has worked significantly with police and other partners to develop its response to knife crime in Leicestershire. So we've developed a knife crime awareness programme that we deliver in schools, and the police have also been working with us to identify those top 10 young people that we're most concerned about carrying knives, and thinking through what interventions we can deliver to target work with that group of young people. There is a multi-agency strategy group which is led by the police that's doing some work not just with young people, but you'll notice with adults and organised crime gangs, and particularly work looking at the targeting of vulnerable young people in those gangs as well. And finally, we've detailed for you some work that we're doing around county lines. This is this is a term that's used to describe activity where organised crime groups move young people around from their home area to another part of the country in order to undertake activities relating to drug dealing. There's a significant piece of multi-agency work going on to look at approaches to deal with this type of crime. It's a national issue, and a protocol is currently being developed to look at how we safeguard those young people who may be vulnerable to this exploitation by those serious and organised crime groups. So to conclude, you'll note that the performance of the Youth Offending Service remains strong, and that the work of the Impact Project, the Youth Inclusion Support Project and our Supporting Leicestershire Families team have contributed to extremely positive performance, particularly in relation to prevention. A lot of the challenges around the current performance are relating to, as we've identified, similar to many local authorities, the rise in the use of knives, drug dealing and gang activity across the county. And again, we've emphasised here that we do have a strong emphasis on prevention work within the Youth Offending Service alongside the work to prevent re-offending by young people. Thank you.
Chris, would you like to add to that at all?
Nothing further to add.
Thank you. Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you. You did mention under the Kickstart Your Life that there was £10,000 provided in 2016 and that's still being used. That is nearly 3 years ago now. So what happens, is there very much money left, and what happens when it's gone, basically? I think you've done very well to make £10,000 last as long as you have in this very important programme.
Yeah, it's nearly completed. Hence, me requesting further funding from the board, the Youth Justice, the YOS Management Board. We've just in recent weeks had an indication from Leicester and Rutland Sport that they might consider a further 3-year funding. So we will be chasing after that, which will reduce a burden on our budget accordingly. But we are hopeful that we will get some additional funding from them. And it is really important. And when we put this piece of work in context to the knife crime and things like that, the important thing is that you've got a very strong pull with knife crime. There's a lot of pressure to continue to be linked to the groups who are selling drugs, because if they've got a debt or something of that kind, then they have to repay that debt. So the idea of Kickstart Your Life and developing good relationships with a young person is that's the pull back, and that we constantly trying to find ways to pull back all the time, so that either we slow down their offending or we pull them away.
Thank you. Mr. Sheehan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm pleased to see that the work of the impact team is valued in the context of this report. I think in the current economic climate, it's all too easy to undervalue the benefit of preventive work, and I do hope that we continue to support impact. But what I want to make a point about really is knife crime. Yes, there has been a lot of concern in the national media about knife crime, and there's been a link, I think, established with online conversations between young people where violence can be incited quite easily and then it carries on in the street, as it were. In terms of intervening and preventing that developing, I thought that would be an interesting, or in fact a key point at which to try and intervene and stop this happening, but there's no mention of it in the report. I'd just be interested to hear what officers' perceptions are of the contribution of online and social media activities to knife crime, because there has been a link in national media about it.
Yes, you're quite right. There is quite a lot of mention of it. What we see in the main is young people, particularly those involved with the selling of drugs. You'll see them on their social media sites, posturing with knives and the like. Because I think that the gang-related activity is not that great, although we are seeing some groups forming in certain areas, we're not seeing that competitive nature that you might see in some of the bigger cities, where the provocation online is a key feature of the rivalries that develop. But you do get young people triggering bits of behaviour with each other through online activity. I think my main concern is the establishment of the organised crime, and that they get a foothold in our communities, and that we need to make sure that we tackle that. And there's a number of different levels at which we need to do that. Obviously the police have got to do some disruption work around the organised crime elements of it. But as the police will say, is that they will be replaced by others quite quickly. So our work has got to be in the preventative arena. to make sure that we discourage young people as early as possible from using knives and getting involved in that activity, and trying to identify those young people who are most at risk and intervening with them early to reduce that risk. Is that enough for you?
I hear what you're saying. Obviously, it's important we do focus on gang-related and drug crime, but I think there's a whole different raft of activity, an area of concern that doesn't necessarily relate to gangs and drugs, that evolves between young people, that starts online and then migrates to the streets. And I think that's something we need to keep an eye on as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Pendleton.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, Sean's really taken the impact team and highlighted it, which is what I wanted to do, and sing its praises, because I really do value it. And I think that, you know, they are our reactive stormtroopers, but equally our proactive individuals, and that's really good. And he's looked at, obviously, the feedback which they've got, and Chris has outlined it in terms of exactly how he's evolving the tactics of that team. And really, you've covered it, but just to add and to ask, is there anything that you feel in addition that we at either county or district could do that we aren't doing, that we might consider? And leave it at that, Chairman. Thank you.
There's an offer. Yes. For me, in terms of the development of this issue, it is really in the preventative area that we've got to focus our efforts. And it is in the education within schools and providing positive activities for young people in communities where they're most at risk. And those are our most deprived areas, generally speaking. The area that is of particular concern at the moment is Charnwood. There's some indications that there may be some activity in Hinckley, but I would guess that those are the ones that are big enough for us to begin to notice. There's probably levels of activity going on elsewhere, but it is in the preventative and in terms of positive activities, so that there's that pull, or there's that occupying young people so that they can not get drawn into the activities of organised crime and drug dealing. That would be the area that I would see as being most productive in terms of reducing the impact of this.
Thank you, Chairman. So then, in terms of our SLF teams and our district and borough teams, we are well equipped, I think, to begin to look at that. If we're alerted, and I'm sure through schools, certainly Jane will look at making sure that the schools, personal social health education teams know of the area that they need to be in. Thank you.
Thank you. Coming from a school background, an awful lot of work is done on grooming for sexual exploitation, but nothing. So what I've taken from you is organised crime, also grooming children as adolescents on this, and that is something that we need to get the schools involved in and aware of, that the grooming is taking place for those. Right, Mr. Carveman.
Thank you, Chair. What I'm about to say probably is not very popular, but everybody's talking about prevention. And the thing that has disappeared is the youth service. That used to be the prevention. The youth clubs that the young people used to have access to. Around my way, there are a couple of youth clubs run by volunteers. One we just closed down for the lack of about £1,000 for pay a youth worker for a couple of hours a week. What I find very upsetting and very strange is that in order to get any help and to play wonderful football matches and drama and things like that, you've almost got to have a criminal record. Now, everybody here was talking about prevention. I think the biggest prevention is that we get the youth service going again, and I'm just wondering what the voluntary sector has some wonderful youth clubs which are struggling for the lack of a few £100. Do we work together with what's left of the youth service? I think of 2-3 clubs in my borough which are absolutely struggling and for a few £100 could have a real service for the young people. People, volunteers that give hours worth of work, but are just not there now. What can we do about it? Is there a way that you're able, or we as a council are able? I know times are hard and we've got no money and things are all this cutback, but I think the more that you get young people into youth clubs, and I was brought up in a youth club, you can blame them probably for me sitting here, but so there's a lot to be said. But really and truthfully, I think that's the bit that you're missing out.
Thank you. I was too brought up in a youth club, from the Krakatoa to the Grain in Birstall. But of course I hadn't got any draw for home. You know, I hadn't got any PlayStations and things like that. So youth clubs were central to our growing up. Yes, and table tennis. And I don't think that my son would have got involved in a youth club in the same way as I got involved in a youth club. Mrs. Moore, would you like to come back to that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we did a review some time ago, and whilst the County Council now doesn't run any youth clubs that aren't either targeted for young carers or for children with special educational needs and disabilities, the majority of our youth clubs across the county are either run by districts and boroughs or by a voluntary sector or indeed private providers now as well. Part of what we did with that review is retain 21 youth workers, which we still have within the local authority, and those youth workers work directly with young people who are at risk of offending, so they don't need to be convicted or offending. Those youth workers work with young people who may be vulnerable for a whole variety of reasons. We took a very deliberate decision to stop running youth clubs some time ago because, as the chair highlighted, young people weren't coming along to clubs, and actually what we needed to do was look more innovatively at different types of support we could provide to vulnerable and high-risk young people. So, as Chris pointed out, we've worked with boroughs and districts to look at providing different leisure activities. We've got initiatives like Impact, who go and find young people that were hanging around on the street as opposed to coming into our youth clubs. We work with leisure providers. We have Kickstart Your Life. We had a whole range of projects as well. But we do still have a number of youth workers who will provide work with will work directly with vulnerable young people who require additional support over and above what they may well get through school.
Can I just one further point? We're also working with the KICS programme, which is Leicester City Football Club's Premiership programme, and we're beginning to develop that in the county. Just at the early stages at the moment, but it's very useful because the kudos that comes with the football. Even if you're not interested in football, you know, the glamour of football and the players and all the rest is a very valuable lever to attract young people to participate. And whilst there has to be sport-related programmes, they're becoming more flexible with how they want to deliver that. And they do and are willing to work with our difficult young people, which is even more important.
Thank you. And I know that schools are very much involved in that as well, aren't they, with the City Football Club project. So, Mrs. Wright.
Yes, just in terms of your report at page 64, you reference the LAMI report, and then you note in regard to BAME that the binary reoffending rate was 15% higher. This is concerning, and in order to ensure that its response is targeted effectively, YOS is undertaking further research. So I guess my questions are, what type of research is it undertaking? Do you have an update on that, and what is the timing in relation to it?
I don't have a specific update on it. The area of research that we're looking at is that a BME group, if you take them as a group as a whole, you don't really, they're very different, the groups within it, the black British young people, Asian young people, so the way they might be responding to crime is different. Or getting drawn into crime. So what we want to do is to just have a look at that data. I'm just waiting for Tableau to be developed so that I can actually interrogate the data in a little bit more detail. And I'm hopeful that in the next couple of months that I'll get to that point. But we are still continuing to keep our eye on what's going on with this particular group of young people. But at the moment, I'm just waiting for the data to be able to have a look at that in more detail.
So in terms of time frame, you're thinking the next 2 or 3 months you'll be able to analyse that data and come to something a little more definitive? And would you be willing then to come back to this committee in relation to that?
Yes, of course we can provide an update in relation to that. I will be reporting back to the Youth YOS Offending Management Board on that issue as a regular annual report. So we're going to later this year go back to the board with a report around what we've done and what we've achieved.
Mrs. Chairman, if we could have an update on that, I think that would be useful.
Okay.
Mrs. Page.
Thank you. Last but not least, obviously. I always think great work is being carried on here, and I'm always looking forward to see these reports. However, my problem always is the lines are very blurred within the responsibilities of who does who and what, because a lot of the things are on the remit of the police and crime commissioners areas. So we're talking Melton, City and Rutland. So what I'm never clear about, it is actually where are the county council's responsibilities? Are we going across the whole board and then it becomes a funding issue? You know, we are referring to Kickstart in the city, etc., etc. So where's the financial involvement? How is that? And that's my first question. Secondly, to me, this is very loose. I find, for instance, Sharon's report with the Appendix A, which set out all the details, gave me a real in-depth overview. But here, I kind of would like to see something like that. So I'd see a little bit more of the details, what is being done and where. For instance, I'll give you an example. Probably I'm the only one, but until I read this report, I've never known that there is a Kickstart initiative. So being also a district councillor, it would be nice to know, is there anything my district is doing towards that? How can they help? And, you know, so rather a little bit more meat on the bones, so to speak. The other thing is that I am a great supporter of Impact, and I've always been happy, and originally I used to even go out with Impact in the areas. But I find the ethos of this whole programme has somehow changed, and unless you read these reports, there is very little communications to us as county councillors. I don't know what's going out to the districts. I don't know what the districts are doing individually. And yes, that is a district issue. But as a county councillor, I recall I used to get impact report, what was happening. Then they said, do you know? I'm sitting here and I haven't even been told, and I don't even know that there's something going on in my ward. So I'd like to see some communication back to us as county councillors of what is actually happening in the wards, and for us to actually feed in. So if you can talk me through that, Jane, thank you.
Yes, thank you. In terms of your first question around the remit of and responsibility, the Children and Families Department has a statutory responsibility around preventing offending and re-offending by young people. And we do that in a variety of ways, and that's detailed in this report. It's across Leicestershire. However, Rutland do buy in a youth offending service from us. So often we do talk about work in Rutland, and that's partly because the Leicestershire youth offending service does cover Rutland. They buy a service from us. Chris's reference to the city is it's a project in the city that's working in the county. We're not delivering services in the city. It's a project that, so the KICS project is a Leicester City Football Club project that's working in the county. So we don't work with city young people. Yep, so the knife-related activity, the multi-agency group that we've referenced here is a Leicestershire and Rutland group because it's a police-led group, and obviously, as you know, they work across. But the City Youth Offending Service will also be involved in that to do the city work. In terms of your second point around the detail of the report, we do, obviously the purpose of this report was really to provide an overview. We haven't come for some time to give an overview of the work of the Youth Offending Service. We do work really closely with district councils, and at an operational level, certainly staff within the Youth Offending Service will work closely with district staff to talk about work going on in the area. And certainly if there's a young person in Harborough or North West Leicestershire who is involved in Kickstart Your Life, then we would work closely with the district to look at how we can identify. In relation to your last point, Mrs Page, I hadn't realised there'd been a change, and I will pick that up. I know that county councils would get a beginning and end report when impacts are in the area. It could be that impact haven't been in your area, but I'll take that away and I will check with the Youth Offending Service to look at that communication going forward. Thank you.
I'd just like to make a comment that whilst we acknowledge the positive work of the impact that's had, we'd also like to note that ward members are not necessarily kept informed of any work in their specific areas and their wards. Knife crime, noted that it's linked with organised crime, and that seems to be the concern at the moment, that it's escalating, and that we require or request an update of the LAMI report on the next meeting. Thank you very much.
Committee probably remembers this is an annual report that comes to you. There is no statutory requirement to bring it here, but that's been the tradition. This details the business activity that's going to go on in the forthcoming year for the local Safeguarding Children's Board. To remind members, that covers Leicestershire and Rutland. So this is the work programme that's going to be developed. It's the last one. I'll come on to that a little bit later on, because LSCBs are going to stop operating and new arrangements are coming into effect. So this report identifies 5 priorities. Those priorities are decided for a variety of ways, via local drivers for change, serious case reviews, domestic homicide reviews, recommendation from Ofsted reports, various other means as outlined in the report. There are annual development sessions with the safeguarding boards where all the key partners come together and decide what the priorities are. These priorities are then discussed with children and young people as well to get their views, so they're involved in the process as well. So the report outlines the 5 priorities. The first priority is about partnership transition, and as I explained, under the Children and Social Work Act, it will be 2017, I believe, safeguarding, there is no longer a requirement to operate LSCBs, local Safeguarding Children's Board. However, key partners, ourselves, the police and health, that's the CCGs on the health side, must come together to put new arrangements in place to quality assure the safeguarding arrangements that operate in the area, Leicestershire in this case, and Rutland. Clearly, the role of the Safeguarding Board is not to deliver operational services, it's there to check that those services are up to standard. And the new arrangements that will come into operation will have a same focus. As I say, it's at present it's the council's responsibility to establish the safeguarding board, and the key partners, health and police, have a responsibility to cooperate. Under the new arrangements, it will be a tripartite responsibility between the local authority, police and CCGs to deliver the new arrangements. There is no requirement to have an independent chair anymore, as we have at present. We are waiting final guidance from the government on this. The legislation was rushed through just before the general election, and there wasn't time, therefore, to have a lot of the statutory guidance that always provides the detail on these matters. That was the guidance has been out for consultation. It has been delayed. We're now told it will be available early summer. We don't anticipate there'll be major changes, but we really can't finalise anything until that guidance is available to us. We then have 12 months with partners to set up the new arrangement, and 3 months to bring that new arrangement into force. We anticipate that will be from July this year, so effectively 15 months. In that interim period, we will continue to operate the LSCB as it stands at present, and this business plan will be the detail of that work undertaken by that board in that period. So you can see the number one priority is about the partnership transition, to make sure all those arrangements are in place, and that the board is adequately well, it won't be a board, but whatever the new arrangements are adequately supported. The second priority is multiple risk factors. What we used to call in the old days the toxic trio, now called the trilogy of risk, which you often see in families where there are safeguarding issues, mental health, substance misuse and domestic violence are factors that often appear in a lot of cases involving safeguarding issues. This has been around for a period of time, and we have undertaken pieces of activity around this, but we're recognising that we need to do further work on this, particularly in the area of domestic abuse, which is a major factor in our work. The third priority is safeguarding children access to services. This is about thresholds, when we intervene, when we don't intervene, and how we intervene. And members will be reminded that in our safeguarding report by Ofsted, this is one of the areas that was identified that we needed to do further work on. So again, we talked earlier in the the partnership plan about establishing a MASH and the work in those areas. So this priority is linked to those sort of developments, to ensuring those pathways are robust and safe. Priority 4, sexual exploitation, trafficking and missing, and gangs. I think we're all aware of that, and we've done a lot of activity on that and have some very good services, but we need to continue to be robust in monitoring what's happening and achieve further improvements, and that's what's there. And finally, priority 5 relates to safeguarding for children with special educational needs and disabilities. We know this group of young people, research tells us, is the most vulnerable young people that we deal with, and we need to make sure that our arrangements in this area continue to be robust, and see if ways that we can improve those priorities. So that, in a nutshell, is where we are with this business report. Any changes that I talked to you about in terms of the new arrangements will obviously have to go to Cabinet, and as those are developed, I'm sure will come via this committee on its way to Cabinet.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meredith. Mrs. Page.
Thank you. Greatly appreciated. Now, the priorities and everything are very much based on robust monitoring, on effective communication, on evaluation of data and performance management tools. Now, there doesn't appear to be a reference of how this is going to be implemented. And what I mean by that, it is when I used to sit on the safeguarding board, there was always a total confusion of everybody having a different data system and their IT information provided by different means. So you didn't have a comparable tool. So for instance, somebody used to work by one standard and somebody used to work to another standard. Now, it was supposed to be looked at, evaluated to try to find a nominator that ensured that all the agency worked to the same sort of IT system and the same sort of indicators. And as that is really paramount, I was wondering if that has been addressed, and if not, why it isn't in any of the actions to ensure that all of the information is about as much equal to all of the partners, so they can work to one standard.
There is one standard, and you can go onto the LSCB website and you can look at the policies and procedures, and they are joint policies and procedures, and in fact they're joint policies and procedures that we managed jointly with the city, because some of the partner agencies work across the city and in the county.
I'm not talking about the joint policies, I'm talking about the IT provision, i.e. management tools. For instance, the police has got different indicators as probably the safeguarding board, and if Jane, you probably can recall that that is what we have brought up under the previous chairman for it to be addressed, and I was just wondering if that has been addressed.
Yeah, I was going to go on and explain that. Any performance indicators have to be linked to policies and procedures first, and then the performance indicator determines how well you're doing against it. And there are agreed policies and procedures, and there is a safeguarding effectiveness group that meets under the board that looks at the performance information that's provided by various sources, mostly the county, because the county council, because we are the lead body for child protection procedures, so we keep a lot of that information. If I talk about the county first, you know that we've talked a lot today about Tableau. That's our new reporting system, and our performance information is getting, I feel, a lot better and more accurate than it has done in the past. It would be lovely to think we could all operate to one single computer system. There have been attempts in the past to do that by central government, which failed to materialise. It's very, very difficult, so I don't think there's any possibility that we're going to end up with a single computer system. Each authority will continue to operate their own computer systems. What we have to do is work hard to make sure that when we share information, that we're quality assuring, checking that information and going back to make sure it's the same. But there are shared standards, and that we do report on that information, as I say, via the Safeguarding Board and via SEG. But these are complex situations, and I don't want you to think that I'm saying that there aren't times when we have challenge or we come back and say we don't agree and disagree with that. But I think that's the whole nature of it, the fact that we have that challenge and we can go back and challenge those sorts of factors. Clearly, that context, the new arrangements that come in will have to make sure that all those arrangements continue into the future.
With one, that's great to know, but as it is a challenge do you not think it would be then prudent to have it an objective as well, so it's highlighted and it's constantly being kept on the radar?
Sorry, what now? What is an objective?
To ensure that, you know, the IT, as you just elaborated, you know, that is being taken on the radar, that is constantly as a management and looked at.
The two big elements that the board has to occupy is qualitative and quantitative data. So the quantitative data is mainly about performance information which is generated in the way, and that's going to continue to be a top priority. The other element is the qualitative information. So often quantitative information is what I call indicative. It's an indicator that you've got an issue. To really understand that issue, you have to get into the qualitative side when you start to do case audits or look at the detail to find out why there's a particular issue. So any arrangement for the board will continue to have those qualitative and quantitative aspects of its work going forward in the future. The notion of some shared computer system, I think, is not on the agenda.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think this will take long, but if you could just clarify. The Children's Board is going out of business. It's ceasing. But the development plan here is going to happen until it disappears. So if I was to say, ask you to look on page 81, and there's a task and finish group there that is done its work by June 2018. Has it actually happened?
To check on that, do you know, Sharon, if that is operated? Do you know?
And there's just a couple in July, as I can assume what is down there is really going to happen.
So I can pick up the first one. So the first one, which is the objective around ensuring that work with children with special educational needs and disabilities considers and responds. Yes, that's almost complete. We did an audit back in January and audited a number of cases, and that report is going back to the board in the next few weeks. So that piece of work is completed.
If I can say that the multi-agency file audit on domestic abuse is and has taken place. So we've done an audit of domestic abuse families and children living with domestic abuse within social care, and that's linked into a multi-agency audit.
Okay, thank you very much to the committee members, and thank you very much to the officers. Through that, our next meeting will be July the 4th at 1:30. Thank you very much. It's Independence Day.
Yeah,
Happy
American
anniversary.
Independence
My second grandchild's birthday. Oh, cool. 1:30, yeah. It was brought forward because of a funeral service this afternoon. It says 1:30.
Yeah,
Have you
it's
not got
1:30.
it? Yeah.
I've got it at 1:30.